of all things. So it's called eschatology. It's a big book phrase. Essentially, if that word slips out, I'm trying to let it slip out. What we're talking about is the end times and how we think about the end times. Are we good? Okay. So when we think about heaven, we talk some about what are the issues, the things that come to mind. Is there anything else anybody wanted to kind of throw out there? What common images of heaven? What it's like? I mean, anybody want to rattle some off for us? Pearly gates. There you go. I don't even know what that means, really. Like, are they made of pearl or are they like pearly in color? I don't know. Who else? Clouds. Lots of clouds. Definitely. Yes. Chocolate. Huge stashes of chocolate. Like, what is that movie? The Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And there you go. Who else? Everything's white. I'm not opposed to them being different colors. That's just that let it be on camera. But yes, absolutely. Huh? I think you said chrome. It's like, yes, chrome. Yeah, all right. Okay. What else?
Lots of really weird animals.
Really weird animals. Things with eyes and eyes on the eyes and wings underneath the wings and covering them and fly. Yeah. Milk and honey flowing all. That sounds like a sticky mess. Doesn't it sound bad? Yeah, big marble columns. There you go. Good. Anybody else? Yeah? Singing all the time. Yeah, there you go. Does anybody else have one back here? Did you have one you want to share? Okay, that's all right. How about back here? I like it. I like where we're going with that. That's good stuff. Infinite, no bound. Yeah, I mean, infinity in all directions, and yeah.
No marriage.
No marriage. Okay, there you go. That sounds like a place you want to go. All right, yeah, let's go to heaven. So, Sam, you want to have one? Yeah, whether or not we'll know people. Yeah, so we have all these questions and these stories. Where do these things come from? What are the things that shape our perception of heaven? That's another open question. What was that? Kids Kingdom? Okay. Yeah. And for those of you who are visiting, that's like our kids ministry class. I'm making sure my fly's like not open, so just so you know. I'm going to speak pretty frankly, so yeah. Your imagination? Yeah, there you go. Family. Where you're raised makes a big difference. Like what country, what culture. Huge difference in the kind of story and the pictures that come to mind. Yeah, what else? Yeah, movies and the culture. Yeah, definitely. Anybody else have something they wanted to add on to that? Dante's Inferno. There we go. Anybody read that, by the way?
Yeah.
Weird stuff. Okay. Okay. Oh, because you've read it, yeah. I'm sorry? Funerals. Definitely. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, and you think about that. At a funeral, we're all coming there and we're telling this story of person is and where they're going, and our whole mindset and everything in our lives is centered on a story. And I think when we talk about these images, I mean, some of them are kind of funny, some of them are sort of biblically rooted, we think, but it kind of depends on how we read the passages. You know, we have things that influence the way that we tell our story. So I'm going to tonight we're going to look at two ancient stories, two ancient ways of telling this story about where this is headed, and from that, we're going to kind of take those two perspectives, and then we're going to go to the Bible, and we're going to look at a few passages that tend to either make us uncomfortable, like weird us out when we talk about heaven, at least weird me out when I talk about heaven, things like about being caught up with the Lord in the air, and what that even means, and all that. And then we're also going to we're going to look at those passages kind of through each of those lenses, and we're going to see what happens when we tweak it, when we change the lens a little bit to one that was likely more what Jesus had himself. And then from there, we're going to go into what that actually means. So I'm a college kid. What does that mean tonight? Like when I go home, what does that mean now? What does it mean tomorrow in class? So there will be a practical implication. That's where we're headed. Let's start with the two stories. So essentially, I'm going to talk a little bit about the narrative that we're telling. It's very much ethereal, which is sort of out there. Like it's very hard to describe. It's sort of majestic, sort of like this weird. I think I don't know if it's weird, but I think like a multicolored like cloud. Like you can't like wrap your mind around it. And the word I guess in Greek, I don't know if this is really true, but I read it somewhere. That the word for mystery in Greek, like when you when you talk about mystery, it's almost like it's like a Rubik's Cube, and every time you turn it, you just get more and more confused. Like that's kind of, in a nutshell, what the Greek word for mystery was. And so this is all kind of a mysterious thing. The story that we tell ourselves, though, about this, largely is going to come in our culture, and as a Western culture, as an American culture certainly, but as a Western culture, it can be traced back to Greek origins. Now we are going to like do some serious over generalizations, and all generalizations are false. If you can appreciate the irony there, I like that one. So we're going to be really generalizing things. We're going to be leaving things out that we just can't get to. So feel free, if you guys want to write questions down or whatever, you can bring them to me afterwards. We can talk about them. But just for the sake of time, we're going to have to kind of crank through it. So we're going to look at the Greek story. The two stories we're going to look at is the Greek story and the Jewish story. Jesus likely held the Jewish story, right? Jesus was a Jew. He wasn't a Christian. Big surprise, okay? So he grew up in Palestine. He likely was neither blonde nor blue-eyed nor had flowing hair or, ran along the beach or anything like that. He likely was just a typical sort of small frame, but fairly well built. I mean, he's a carpenter, right? You got to have some kind of meat on your bones to be a carpenter. Sort of, maybe ruddy is what some of the Old Testament passages use, and some, for describing what he might have looked like. So he was a Jewish man growing up in a Jewish world, and in that world, I mean, the stories of the Jews just pervaded the culture. I mean, all over the place. A lot of these kids, I mean, by the time they were 5, they would literally have to have memorized books of the Bible. I mean, and if they went on in school later on, they would be memorizing literally the entire passage, the entire Old Testament passage. So for the Jews, commitment to the story, commitment to retelling the story was crucial. We're going to look at the Jewish story. We're looking at the Greek story. Let's start with the Greek story, and we'll see if this sounds familiar. So for the Greeks, more or less, there was heaven, which is up here. I kind of think of it as more kind of vertical, right? So there's heaven up here, and there's the lower realms down here. And essentially, this is kind of yucky and bad and gross, and this is kind of yucky and bad. And up here is where our souls are from. Our soul, if you're Greek and you're talking about soul, what you're talking about is that part that is inside of you that is eternal, but it's trapped inside your flesh. Okay, so this is a Greek way of thinking. Now, another way of describing this is called dualism. And the reason why is because you have these kind of two separate sort of realms running parallel to one another with very little interaction between them. Depending on what you believe, you might be one who kind of believe that the gods up here every once in a while came down and stirred the pot and came back up. You may not. You may think they kind of leave us alone. But the point is, for dualists, for a Greek perspective, you had heaven, which was good. You had the earth, which was bad and just gross and yucky, and the goal was to escape. So for the Greeks, the story they told about where this was going was we're gonna get out. We gotta leave. It's bad. So now that had some implications. For some of them, that meant that pleasures in the body were bad, so you would beat your body, and that was like a more holy thing. So you could go and you could eventually somehow through that reach up to these divine levels by denying what's down here. Some of them pretty much thought, well, it doesn't really matter, so I can do whatever I want down here as long as I have a certain belief, or they called it a gnosis, a knowledge of what's holy up here, and what down here is really irrelevant. So it really downplayed the physical person of the realms, right? Now, a Jewish story was very different. A Jewish story was centered on God as creator and the creation is good. That was the first thing I started with. God is the creator, and what He made was good. And God made both. In the beginnings, it says that God created the heavens and the earth. And for the Jews, as far as how they viewed themselves and spiritual versus physical, there's not a whole lot of talk about what happens after you die. In the Old Testament, there's and in terms of they were aware of the inner spiritual life and how that's different from just me walking around the street. They were aware that we kind of have an inner dimension to ourselves and a spirituality, but your soul, so to speak, and your body were sort of were two sides of the same coin made by God, and God declared it good. So the belief that your soul is eternal, or there's anything really even eternal about us as in and of ourselves, was a Greek idea, not a more Jewish idea. Does this make sense so far? Any questions? Are we okay? So from there, we've talked about the creation being what God is. God made it and it's good. So when we think about where the Jews thought about where this is going, whereas the Greeks were focused on this place is bad and gross and we got to get out of here. For the Jews, it was a struggle with reconciling who they knew God to be with what was kind of before them. Does that make sense? And some of you guys may have felt this way. Do you have a question? Like when you get to like I don't know about mythology, but when you get to philosophy, there's definitely like ethics. And I'm totally speaking like entirely out of my realm of qualifications, but I think it was tended to be more focused on like civic duty kind of ethics, not so much like as a, moral superiority kind of thing. Does that answer your question? Oh yeah. And intended to be civic duties, which is always convenient for the politicians. So, you pay your taxes and you get to go to the good place, and you don't, you go to a bad place. So, so that said, for the Jewish idea, the idea about where this is going, you had to wrestle with, and how you guys fairly familiar with the story of Israel and Abraham? Are we? Yes, I see some nods. Okay, good. Okay, so. Israel was God's people. God had promised them, I'm going to make you my people. I'm going to bless you, Abraham, who is the father of the Jews, and I'm going to make you a blessing to all the nations. So, and God was going to use Israel to bless these nations. And as a result of blessing the nations, long story short, we could drag this through the different passages and stuff. Long story short, as a result of the Israelites being a blessing to the nations, all the other nations would come to know who God was. And so the whole reason God had chosen the Jews was so that the other nations could get to know Him. The Jews were kind of supposed to be on the stage, so to speak. And when they saw, when the other nations were able to look in and kind of see, wow, what is this nation? How are they so successful? Who is this God they worship? They were to kind of almost be envious and want to know about it. And the prophets envision it as someday all of the earth will be filled with God as the waters fill the sea. Now, if you think about that for a second, how do the waters fill the sea? They are the sea. Like, what is the sea without the water? I mean, it's this weird stuff, like mind-blowing, right? But that was kind of the vision, that somehow this knowledge of God would spread, and everybody would be brought into it, and all nations would come, and they would come and know God, and He would finally reign as king. That was what they envisioned, but in reality, they kept finding themselves in exile, and struggling, and pain. And I think some of this narrative probably resonates with some of you right now. I mean, envisioning and having an image of who God is, it doesn't really seem to be congruent with where your life is right now. And God, I thought you were going to be this way. I thought when I grew up and I sang the songs and I did these things, I thought that, my life was going to look like this. Well, you're feeling very similar to how a Jew would have felt when Jesus was talking. See, because the Jews, even though they had come back, they were actually in Jerusalem at this point. For a while, they've been out. They were in exile in Babylon. And the Jews were brought back into their own country, but the Romans ruled over them. So even though they were brought back, they still felt as if they were in exile because of some of the oppression of the Roman Empire. So for them, they had that feeling. Just like, God, I thought you were like this. I thought my life was going to be this way. I thought you promised this. Why is it this way? So from that, I'm going to grab a quick sip of water. Everybody at work makes fun of me because I bring these things in. I think they're economical. So there. Yeah, listen to NPR, so take that. Okay. So the Jewish narrative was focused on God as creation, and it was good. It was reaffirming that it was good, but it was just this yearning of how is God going to reconcile this? Now, and the other important thing to recognize about the Jewish story is that it wasn't so much about heaven being up here and earth being down here. It was a narrative about God's space and our space. So God's space is essentially, it's His realm, and I mean, to one degree it's everywhere, but it's also kind of not. I mean, to the best of what we can see in the Bible, when God is like right there, bad things happen. Like scary, terrifying things happen. Things catch on fire. Like when you're too close, it's scary. So to the Jew, in the creation story, we see this. We see, okay, God makes man, or there's God makes heaven and the earth. He brings order out of the chaos, right? And then He makes man, and man is like the climax of His creation, and He makes the man to reflect the image of God, and almost kind of enters into like a partnership with Him, so that he can name his creatures, and He can steward over the land. But soon, man isn't happy with that. Man wants to step up. They want to kind of get an angle on it. They want more power, a little bit more. Step up. I want to be God. Well, that didn't work. So they chose that, and what we see from that point on is a reversal from order back into chaos. And then pretty soon, all the known world is back to being underwater again, with Noah in the ark. So, from that point where man chose to be God, God's space and our space were separated. They were supposed to be together, but then they were separated. Now, God, when He had made the covenant with the Jews, there were certain kind of points of connection. We have the temple, right? And for the Jews, the temple was sort of the meeting point, sort of heaven and earth, and that's why you really could not go in there unless you were a qualified person, and on certain days of the year. Like that was serious stuff. That is the connection point of heaven and earth. You don't go in there. You don't mess with that. Bad things happen to people when they do that. So, for the Jews, their narrative is that there's heaven, or God's space and our space are not so much vertically distant, but they're more kind of horizontally. They're like coexisting, but there's this veil. There's this thing that just can't. It's in the way. It doesn't. It's out of joint, so to speak. You ever had a shoulder out of joint? Anyone had that happen? It hurts a lot. I've actually never had it happen. I used to work in an ER, though, and I saw a lot of people that have it happen, and it was gross. To watch that thing get slammed back in there in the hood. But, so for them, there was sort of a disjointedness about where things were at. That there was, even though God's space and our space were here, His space hasn't quite filled all of our space yet. And it's just not right. You ever felt like that? I mean, you turn on the news. I mean, I feel like that when I turn on the news. Right? Like, I mean, you learn about all these kids being held in a bunker in Alabama, like for, what's going on? That's not right. That's crazy. There's just something out of joint about that. Jewish narrative focuses on God as creator. Heaven and earth are God's space and our space is really more how we should think about it. And where it's going is eventually God's going to bring it all back. Does that make sense? Okay. So, have we lost anybody yet? Okay. Let's look at if we kind of look at the consequences of these two stories. On the one hand, we have the Greek story, where basically the focus is on escaping, right? Getting out. Let's get out of here. This is largely the story of Western Christianity, and really the story of a lot of religions. And it plays out something like this. Bad. There's something, you've done bad things. If you want to, get unbad, you want to get clean, you either need to do these certain things, come into contact with this, say this prayer, do this thing, and then you will be forgiven, and then you'll have reached moral status, and when you die, your body will stay here, and you will go to heaven. You'll escape. That's predominantly a Greek story. Now, how do we switch from the Jewish story into the Greek story? The earliest Christians were Jews, right? The earliest Christians were Jews. The earliest Christians would have really well known the story, the more Jewish kind of outline of the story. But slowly what ended up happening is, which is supposed to happen, right? I mean, more and more Greeks, more and more pagans, other nations came into the church and the faith, and it grew and it grew. But as that happened, and as we kind of lost the Jewish heritage, this Greek narrative kind of came in. This narrative that was heaven is up here and earth is down here, and that story came to the Scriptures, and then some of the most influential Christian thinkers from that time and onwards, the way they interpreted Scriptures using their narrative ended up setting the tone for basically all of our culture. Are we making sense? Are we good? Okay. So let's go to a couple Scriptures. There are some scriptures here that kind of weird. This one weirds me out. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Who's ever heard of the rapture? Anyone ever read Left Behind or seen Left Behind? Can someone explain sort of what the general idea about the rapture is? The rapture is it is involved in the return of Christ, certainly. What else? People disappear. Yeah, like that. I mean, the rapture. People just disappear. I mean, anybody read the books or seen the movies? There's movies, right? No one's ever seen it? A long time ago. You have? Yeah, like zombie apocalypse or something. I don't know. It's really weird. So yeah, rapture is essentially it's the belief that, I mean, you ever seen those bumper stickers? Like, in case of rapture, this vehicle will be unmanned. You know, it's supposed to be like a warning or something. So it was the belief, and we're going to read the passage that's kind of where it comes from. It's sort of the belief of rapture is a combination of a couple of passages, but this is the main one, I think. 1 Thessalonians 4 is where we're going to be. So yeah, it's just the belief that basically there will come a time when God is going to take the souls of His elect, or His chosen ones, and the ones who've chosen Him, and pull them up to heaven. Up here, they'll escape, and whatever they were doing before will just kind of carry on. Like, they were driving a car, well, the car just keeps going. It just would be chaos, right? I mean, there's like movies about airplanes like being left unmanned, and because the pilot was a Christian and he just disappeared or something. I mean, so that's the belief. It's the rapture of sort of like this sucking up. This is where that comes from. Can we get somebody to read 1 Thessalonians chapter 4? Let's read 13 through 18. Anyone ever read this before? Has anyone else been weirded out by the passage? Like, what does that even mean? Okay. On the one hand, tonight, bear in mind, we're not going to come to hard and fast conclusions. We like that in our culture. We like the scientific method. We like a hypothesis. We like, an experiment. We like to be able to evaluate the experiment, and we like to publish our results and then sort of look at other areas we need to research in. We can't do that with things like theology and eschatology, where this whole thing is going. All we can do is adjust the narrative that we're telling. And the closer we get to the story that Jesus likely had in his mind and that Paul had in his mind here, the more clarity we're going to have here. Okay, so this passage here, the confusing thing, there's a couple of things, but the Lord Himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command. So it does kind of sound like He's up here in heaven and like Silver Surfer, He kind of hops on and comes down, and and then from there, the voice of an angel, the archangel, and the trumpet of God. There's a trumpet. That's awesome. I used to play trumpet. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up with the Lord, with them in the clouds. So there's clouds. Somebody mentioned clouds over here. To meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always be with the Lord. Confusing. It almost does sound like a Greek story, right? We leave here, we go up there, there's the clouds, and whatever happens down here is basically irrelevant, because now we're going to be with the Lord up here in the air. That's the Greek story. Let's look at it through a Jewish lens. Let's go to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel. Who knows anything about the book of Daniel? Anybody have anything they can say about it? Somebody's got something on there. Come on. You what? Story of Daniel? It is the story of Daniel. There we go. You go to UGA, don't you? There you go. Lots of weird dreams, yes. Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. What else? Fiery furnace, I heard. Yep. Yeah. Good deal. All right, so that's pretty much it. We're going to look here at one of the dreams. And he has a lot of these visions, and there's going to be a lot of language here. As we read this language, this is ancient poetry. This is not meant to be like a CNN news report live from what's going to happen in the future. This is what it looks like. This is language, and for these people, when they use language about the skies and the stars and the moons, these are all terms that other nations around them had worshipped, right? So these Babylonian cultures, other cultures would worship the elements, and the Jewish poets would kind of take those things, and I think kind of as like a sort of sticking it to them, would show that, well, the stars are going to fall out of the sky, and they would use this language that would sort of subvert everything the other nations were worshiping, and show that, well, God is on top of that, right? Okay, so let's go here to Daniel chapter 7. We'll start in verse 9. Actually, we'll start in verse 13. Who wants to read 13 and 14 for me? Back here. What time are you now?
And there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days, who was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and God and power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language will worship him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed.
Now this is interesting. We hear some echoes of the Jewish story, right? We hear some echoes of all nations, all people, everybody, everywhere coming to know who God is. We also hear a phrase, the Son of Man. Where have we heard that before? From Jesus, right. I don't think Jesus was just trying to be humble and was like, yes, guys, I'm God, but really, call me Son of Man. Seriously, please. I'm just Son of Man. Jesus was purposely using language where everybody in his culture would have known what he was talking about. And it was this. And the reason why it was this was because for his culture, when they were stuck in Babylon and things were just terrible and they wanted to go home and they were hungry and lonely and people had died and they missed everybody, this is the kind of story they told. Was no, someday all this is going to get put back together. This is going to get put right. Someday God's going to come back. And this Son of Man, this image of one like the Son of Man. And there was different thoughts about what that meant. Was it David? Was it somebody else? Was it a servant? What is that? We don't know. There's tension there. It's kind of unclear. But Jesus clearly saw something about what he was doing in this story. So this, I think, is one of the themes that Paul is using here in that passage. We see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. And then we also see all glory and authority. He becomes king. I mean, all glory and dominion is given to him. He becomes the king. So God comes. He's riding on the clouds of heaven. He comes down, takes the reins, puts things back together, becomes the king. Totally turns over all the other kings because you can only have one. God becomes king and everybody else falls down on their knees, right? So that's one of the things he's looking at. Another one of the examples, we won't turn there. He talks about the trumpets there. The trumpet call of God. In Jewish literature, the trumpet call was kind of a way of being like, I'm really serious. Like listen to this. This is the trumpet call. Okay? Moses had the trumpet. When he came down from the mountain and he had the tablets, there was the trumpet call, and it was an important. This is God has something to say. Here it is, right? So Paul, being a Jew, totally enveloped and having these stories woven into the fiber of his mind and his being, is just trying to wrap his mind around what's going to happen, and he's using all Jewish language. Does this make sense? Okay. So the third thing he's using is actually a reference to Roman politics. Let's go back over there to 1 Thessalonians. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. We're back in there. We're looking now at looking at 16. 17. So now he says, now, then we who are left, so already Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command and with the voice of the archangel and the sound of the trumpet of God. Dead in Christ will rise first. And then we who are left to be alive will be caught up together in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. what happens next? Does it say? Anybody? It says we'll be with the Lord forever. But it doesn't say where. I mean, are we really just going to be up in the clouds like forever? Or it's very easy for us to kind of, because we're already telling a Greek story, to go, oh, so we're going to go to the clouds, and then naturally it's going to go all the way up, right? And then that's elevator up, bing, and eventually we'll get there. Well, that's not the story. We got to be careful. The Jewish story, of the Jewish way of looking at this. Well, we talked about the Jewish way of looking at it. This is really more of a reference to Roman empirical political culture. So if you were an emperor in Rome and you have these little peon territories way out on the fringe, every once in a while you got to go out and visit them, just to keep them in line, right? In case they get any funny ideas about becoming their own place or whatever. Because you're the king, you're Caesar, you're the ruler. So every once in a while you got to go in and just kind of check in on everybody. When you go there and you get in, local authorities, they kind of nudge everybody, and the tradition would be for everyone to come out into the streets and to welcome the ruler. Right. This is his land. This is Caesar's land. And in case you did, in case you forgot it was Caesar's land, there were statues of Caesar all over the place, just so you knew whose land it was. And here he comes. We all go to the street. We all go to the gate, the entryway, and we meet him and we bring him into his rightful territory because he's Caesar. All hail Caesar, right? Paul is totally flipping that on its head. And I love we'll look later on in the next chapter, because he actually uses a phrase from the Roman Empire and again flips it on its head. Paul is genius. Paul is he's like that kind of sarcastic friend that every once in a while he can pull out these little one-liners and you're just kind of like, whoa, what? Where did that come from? How did you get that? And he does that with the Roman Empire and he flips the whole thing on its head. So this passage we've shown it's not so much about going up there and escaping here. Largely, really, it's about God's reign coming here and establishing His reign here on the earth. God is king, and when the king comes, His people come out and they meet Him. Wow. Now, the passage, to be fair, does not say what happens next. I think that the people here likely would have assumed, like they've seen what happened with Caesar, well, if we're going to meet the king in the air, because he's the Lord of the air, we'll welcome him back. I mean, that's also what we see. I mean, we see this in Revelation 21. Actually, let's go there. Revelation chapter 21. Okay. Another one of the things that we talk about heaven sometimes is where we go after we die. Get some water. 9:30 that y'all are done? 25. What is it? 9:15. Huh? 8. I don't know. I just look at the minute hand. So.
Sure. Just do your thing, man.
Okay.
I mean, you guys still with this?
Yeah. Okay. Revelation 21. By the way, it is one revelation. Just pet peeve. You ever hear people say Revelations? It's only one revelation. I don't know. Doug Jacoby kind of cracks me up on that. That's a really big pet peeve of him. If he's ever teaching, ask him about a passage in Revelations and emphasize the plural and just see what he does. It's pretty fun. Okay, Revelation 21. This is the text about the New Jerusalem. Now again, we are going to see lots of imagery, language. We don't have time to get into all this stuff about really what's going on. But this is a narrative about God's reign coming back and what it looks like. Okay, I'm still figuring out how to use these iPad things and all that. So here we go. Okay, let's have somebody read. Oh, it's not highlighted on here. Okay, let's do 1 through 4. Anyone want to read that? Andrew?
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. Then I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is among men. He will dwell among them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be among them. And he will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning or crying or pain. The first things have passed away.
There you go. And then, verse 5, it says, Behold, I'm making all things new. Blows me away. Yeah. Awesome passage. So, again, we see, instead of this Greek story of heaven being like, I mean, Paul does say I was caught up to this third heaven, whatever that means. Like, is there a second one? Is there literally levels? We don't have time to get into some of those questions. Like, I mean, we just don't have time to get there. But we do see sometimes language of being caught up there, but it seems to be, in those instances, it's not like geographical location. It's more like you're caught up, like I mean, you're into it. You're caught up into something. You're involved. It sucks you in and just envelops you and is caught up into this vision of what God's space was like. And now here we see the exact reversal of Genesis. Whereas God's space and our space was separated, and as a result, order went back into chaos, and still is in a lot of ways. Finally, all things are being made new. And the New Jerusalem, which is the city of God, Jerusalem was where the temple was. And for the ancient people, where your temple was, like every city would have like its own temple. Sometimes, and for other cultures, cities have their own temples, and it was a big thing. It was a part of the identity of the city. And so when he says the New Jerusalem, I mean this is like the city where God's presence is. God's very existence and presence is coming back to the earth to dwell with man again. I mean, we see in Genesis that it was there, right? I mean, there's a story about God kind of walking in the garden and Adam was there. Now I don't literally mean He's walking in the garden, right? Because this is what's weird. If God's walking in the garden, well, what's outside of God, and what is that? What are the implications of that? And that just kind of fries your brain for a second. So don't get too tied up in that. The focus here is that God's space and our space are coming back together, right? Okay, and the result of that is there is no more death, crying, pain. I mean, there was. In Genesis, the result of the fall was the pain of childbirth, the toil of labor, even creation itself. I mean, there was things would grow thorns and thistles, and the Bible seems to think that when God first made things, none of that was really there. It was intended to be this perfect union of God's space and our space and God's creation all together. Okay, so. With that passage again, we're seeing that the Jewish narrative of God's space coming here and not us escaping is more likely the perspective that Jesus would have had, the Jewish perspective, and therefore the perspective that Jesus would have had as a Jew when he talked about heaven. We can turn now and see here. Let's go to First Peter chapter 1. This one's fun. We'll be short. Okay, and we're just going to kind of sample a couple different passages, and we're going to get to the practical stuff here in just a couple seconds. So, 1 Peter chapter 1. Let's look here. Somebody could read for us verses 3 through 5. Sam.
Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In His great mercy, He has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. This inheritance is kept in heaven for you, who through faith are shielded by God's power until the coming of the salvation that is ready to be revealed in the last time.
Boom. There it is. It's in heaven, so we got to go up there to get it, so we got to escape, right? That's how it reads almost naturally. It's kept in heaven for you, so you got to get there to go get it, right? You come over to my house. I'm going to offer you a drink. If you're 21, it might be a beer. If, I don't know, let's just say it's an orange juice, whatever, I don't know. But I say, hey, there's orange juice in the fridge. I've got it in the fridge for you. Do you want some? You can go ahead and grab it. Am I asking you to open the fridge, climb inside of the fridge, and get the orange juice? Because I've kept the orange juice in the fridge? To go, oh, well, it's in heaven, so I got to get up there, and eventually I'll be able to receive it. It makes a lot more sense if we take these other passages, it's very easy when we read the Bible to kind of read things piecemeal, right? One at a time, boom, boom, this says this, this says this. Well, the problem with that is, when you start having discussions with people, you can line up proof text to proof text to proof text to proof text and prove whatever you want. The better thing to do is to read the Bible as a whole, as a big story, a big narrative. And when you come to a passage that's kind of like, I don't know what to do with that, see how it fits into the broader story.
Right.
Okay? Well, that's what we're going to do here. So it's kept in heaven for you, so no, you need to climb in the fridge to get your juice. It's going to come out. And it'll be given to you.
Yeah.
When the New Jerusalem arrives and then God's reign is fully present and manifest. Right? Okay. Any questions? Are we good so far? Okay. We'll look at another passage here. Let's go to Romans chapter 8. We're going to get to the practical side of this now. Okay, so the whole thing we're trying to get to is it's really important to think about the story that we're telling about heaven, right? If we're telling a story about escape, about getting out of here, getting out of Dodge, and kind of letting everything here fall apart, it becomes really, really, really easy to not care at all about what you see on the news. It becomes really easy to kind of be like, wow, this whole thing is going to pot and hell in a handbasket, so I guess I'll just, someday I'll fly away and we'll get there. To do nothing about it. If that's the kind of faith that you have, if that's the kind of faith that you're living, I don't think that's the Christian faith. If that's the kind of hope, what kind of God is that? What kind of God is that who makes a world, who says it's good and goes, oh, it was good until you messed it up. Way to go. Now I'm stuck. I guess I'll send Jesus down or something. I don't know. That doesn't make sense. God made it, it was good, and He meant it. The problem is, when we think we understand what real power and authority is, and we think that we can have it and we can use it well, chaos ensues. You see that in your friendships. You see that when you get in an argument with somebody, and there's something that you could just say, and you could say it, and it would just put them right in their place, right? And so you say it, and then the whole thing blows up, right? There you go. You took the reins, you took the power, you thought that you could execute justice on your own, and everything fell apart. Some of you have probably lost friends because of that, right? Okay. And by the way, it's a lousy marriage move. Just for later on. I've done that a couple times. It's really bad. I'm sorry. So, let's look here at Romans chapter 8. I'll read this one just for the heck of it. Starting in verse 1. There is therefore no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Well, before we say this, I want to start off first. The book of Romans is not a book about how you get saved. It's not a book about where you go after you die. The book was as an actual letter written to actual people, and we got to be really careful when we're reading other people's mail, because we can get the wrong idea pretty easily, right? And start thinking like, oh my gosh, this is, and just go off on crazy places if we don't know who's writing it, who's it written to, what's going on. The context here is Rome is the pagan city. Paul is trying to get the Jewish Christians who come from this Jewish narrative and the Jewish story, and the pagan Christians to come together and to realize that none of your ethnic identities matter anymore. The only thing that matters is Jesus rose from the dead. And are you living as if He did? Okay? Romans chapter 8, verse 1. There is therefore no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. For the law of the Spirit of life has set you free in Christ from the law of sin and death. For what God has done with the law, for God has done what the law, weakened by the flesh, could not do. By sending His own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh for sin, and He condemned sin in the flesh, in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us, who walk not according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. Now here is where we can start. If we have a Greek story, we can start thinking about flesh and spirit. Walk according to the flesh, or am I walking according to the Spirit? And then he says from there, for those who live according to the flesh set their minds on things of the flesh, and those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit. For the mindset on the flesh is death, the mindset on the Spirit is life and peace. For the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. For those who are in the flesh cannot please God. So now it would be very easily to feel like, okay, if those in the flesh can't please God, therefore all this must be very, very bad. And the spirit, sort of the ethereal, the supernatural, must be good. More Jewish perspective of that passage would be, look at it this way. The words that when he says they're spirit and flesh, sarx is the Greek word. S-A-R-X. I mean, that's the English, translation or whatever of the Greek word. It does denote skin and flesh in your body. Spirit there is pneuma, sometimes used for wind. If you think about pneumonia, I mean, we still, especially like in medical terms in Latin, it has a lot to do with wind and spirit. If you read, the Old Testament was translated into Greek shortly before the time of Jesus. And when you go to Genesis, and the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters, it's the pneuma of God that's hovering over the waters. Make sense? So what's at stake here is not, okay, we need to downplay the flesh because it's bad and the flesh cannot please God and I need to attain some sort of ethereal knowledge. No, what's happening here is when you live a life, just like every other animal on this planet, that is driven by money, sex, and power, and food, the result's death. I mean, when you look at your life right now, I mean, the things that motivate you, money, sex, power, food, pleasure, whatever, the result, it's death and emptiness and loneliness. And what he says here is, I mean, the pneuma, God's Spirit has always been what gives life. So, the Spirit of God hovers over the waters, and then when God makes man, He breathes His pneuma, which was the Greek. I mean, the Hebrew would have been ruah. Again, I do not speak these languages, so don't think that I do. But that's the word. The Hebrew would have been ruah, and the Greek would have been pneuma. Put this pneuma into him. The dichotomy here is living by what comes naturally to your kind of animal nature, and what comes naturally to the kind of life that God is trying to breathe into you right now. Does that make sense? All right, last place we'll look at here. 1 Corinthians 15. And we'll get, this is where we'll really get practical. So what do we do now? A couple questions I think we ought to be asking ourselves is, if God's space and our space are on a collision course, right? And they're going to be one. When you get there, when that happens, are you going to feel at home? Will it feel natural? Or will it be like, oh, what's going on? This is so different. I'm not used to this. And the question, I think, is, what I'm asking is, we always read about how there's not going to be any tears, there's no sadness, there's no hunger, when God becomes king, right? And we long for those things. But there's also not going to be any pride, any arrogance, any selfishness, any deception. How much of your life right now is rooted in things that are on a collision course with God? What percentage of your time? If you're getting on and you're wrapped up in porn or in drugs, whatever. If you're into these things and the reign of God comes here, and you've chosen to live a life that is different from what God has made His people to be, you're not going to get to experience the inheritance that God has made His people to receive. You'll be left out. And we could talk about what that looks like and what that means, and there's a lot of narratives with that later on. But if you're living your life on a collision course with God, Paul kind of uses this language of storing up wrath. Now, I'm not a big wrath guy. We could have that conversation. I don't believe that God is up there like, ah, and ready to swing at somebody until finally He sees Jesus and He's like, okay, He's good. And the next one. And, I don't believe that. But there is a notion of you can live your life on a crash course with God. And it's going to come crashing down colossally. A very close friend of mine. Actually, we grew up, that's my brother, actually, I'll be honest with you. We grew up together. Got involved in some things. Set his life on a collision course. And I've seen the entire thing crumble. I don't even know where he is. I don't know where he is. Starting when he was young. It starts small. It starts with investing all your time and your energy in these video games and feeding your own pleasure, and pretty soon, chaos ensues. Everything will fall apart. You watch. It will. All right. 1 Corinthians 15, we won't read the whole thing. Basically, we're looking at the passages about, this is where Paul talks about a spiritual body and a natural body. Again, if we're in a Greek story, this seems like a given, right? Someday we're going to have the natural body will fall, and we'll all get a spiritual body. So the spiritual body would be up here, and the natural body would be down here. So in heaven, none of us will have bodies. The word body means body. The Greek word there is soma, and it only means body. It categorically does not mean not body. Right? It can't be both. Okay. So, and what's interesting here is the words. This is the practical part of this. This is what I want you guys to I want to leave you guys with. So the words here: spiritual body and physical body. I don't have. I guess I have that. Do I have it pulled up here? See if I can do this thing right. Oh no, I don't. Okay. So spiritual body and physical body. The Greek words here, we won't go like hugely into it, but more or less, when it says the natural body, there's the body driven by the psyche, and the body driven by the pneuma. Okay, so the pneuma is the spiritual body. The psyche, this is where we get words like psychology. This is where we get words, psychiatry or psychosis. So the mindset, and we all have one. We kind of do what you want. We die in this body, and if we live our lives doing what we want, the word that's it. You're done. You're gonna reap the results of that. The pneuma, spiritual body, is a body driven by the Spirit of God. Now, there's a suffix at the end of those words there, the spiritual and the physical, or the natural, and the suffix, when it's added to the end of that word, it denotes animation. So it's kind of like this. Like if I say, I have an electric car, and it's parked outside. None of you actually assumes that when you go out there, you're going to see a blazing ball of electricity, like in the shape of a car. I don't have not a car composed of electricity, but it's a car that's driven by electricity, animated by electricity. That's the words here. So when we die in this life, we're given a natural body, and it's a body that is originally driven by what we want to do. We do what we want, and that's fine. And you could choose to live your life that way, and there's consequences. But when you receive the Spirit, you convert, you change, you're baptized. Now your body becomes one that is driven by the Spirit. Does that make sense? So you're going from like a big, gigantic diesel, gas guzzler to like the Nissan Leaf, which I think is cool. But that's like the epitome of a cool car to me. I don't know if that makes me nerdy or not. But so you're going from this. I'm driven by my own natural desires, and that sometimes we see that rear up in our relationships. And you want to say something, you want to do something, you don't want to do something, you're lazy. When we receive the Spirit, we begin to live now as though our bodies were driven by the Spirit. Because later on, when God's space and our space become one, those are the bodies that will be left. What will it look like? We don't know. Paul uses the analogy of a seed. When you plant a seed, what grows is the plant. You can't take the plant, stick it back in the ground, and hope for another plant. You got to put a seed in the ground, right? So our bodies are kind of a seed, but we don't really know what it's going to look like. I think it will be physical, but it will be unfallen physical. I don't know if that makes any sense. First Peter, he talks about an inheritance that's imperishable. Right? A lot of the language with what's going to happen in the age to come about our bodies, our bodies will be physical, but they will no longer be fallen physical. They'll be imperishable. And in 1 Corinthians 15, he uses that language. You should read that whole chapter. The chapter is awesome. Read the whole chapter. He talks about how it's buried. It's buried a physical body. It's raised a spiritual body. It's buried in corruption. It's raised in incorruption. Right? But that begins now. And this is the practical part. That begins right now. So tonight, what are you driven by? What's animating your life? What's animating your decisions? What's dictating what you do next? Now, I'm not saying that I'm like, I'm not big on like, God has like everything kind of mapped out and every left and right, eat this, don't eat that, and do this and do that. I think God wants to be in partnership with us and kind of watch this whole thing unfold. I think He does have broad, kind of hills and valleys and things up there in the road, but I think a lot of it He enjoys kind of watching unfold with us. But to really have that happen that way, and in order for chaos not to ensue, we've got to be animated by the Spirit. Does that make sense? I'll close it out with this passage here. I think I said I'll close it out like 3 times. 1 Corinthians 13. We all know this. You don't have to turn there. At the end of this whole poem on love, he says, now these 3 things remain. Faith. What are the other ones? Hope. And love. The greatest of these is love. But these 3 things remain. Faith, hope, and love. Not money, sex, and power. Not, the bulldogs and the whoever. I mean, it's the 3 things remain. Faith, hope, and love. When all this comes to an end, when His space and our space are one, when the telos, when we finally arrive at the place that we've been setting this telescope to and looking at, when you finally get there, it's going to look like faith, hope, and love. The question is, will you fit in? Amen.